everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to be discussing my first impressions and just an overview of Tarkir Dragonstorm. I had the privilege of playing with the set on the Arena Early Access stream yesterday as of the time of recording this podcast, so I have some experience in addition to some amount of kind of analyzing the set composition that I did after playing with it, in addition to reading the spoiler before playing with it. First, as always, hi, and the notes are available at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. I want to start by going over the mechanics, and I want to talk about both the keyword mechanics that are associated with wedges and also the non-keyworded thematic mechanics that are associated with enemy color pairs, a little bit less obviously. So Abzan's mechanic is Endure, which is when a creature endures, which can happen in a variety of ways. Some creatures endure when they enter, some when they attack, some when you use an activated ability. Regardless, when a creature endures, you either put counters on it equal to its endure number or make a white spirit with power and toughness equal to its endure number. It's not multiple 1/1 spirits, it's a single spirit, it's not a flying spirit, it's just a spirit the size of the amount that you endure. Jeskai is Flurry, which is just an ability word, which is to say that it doesn't have any real meaning. It just points to there's text that's going to tell you the stuff that this usually tells you, which is when you cast your second spell, do something. Sultai is Renew, which is an ability that allows you to spend some mana and exile a card from your graveyard for an effect. In, I believe, all cases, that effect is putting counters on things. Mardu is Mobilize. This, again, has a number, and the number is when this creature attacks, make a number of red 1/1 tapped and attacking creatures equal to the mobilized number. So this one is multiple 1/1 bodies, not one large body. And then Temur is Harmonize, which is flashback, except you can tap a creature to decrease the cost by an amount of colorless mana equal to the cost of the power of the creature that you tap. Those are the set mechanics. And in general, there will be one common and one uncommon and one rare of each color for each set mechanic. There are a few exceptions, like there are 2 black commons that endure, but roughly these mechanics are distributed 1 each to each color and each commonality, with generally an additional gold uncommon or 2, and I think also a rare gold card. The gold card would be all 3 colors. And sometimes Flurry is like if you've already cast a spell this turn or something instead. So that one's a little bit weird if you look at like the breakdown of cards that actually have the word Flurry on them. So each enemy colored pair is part of 2 different wedges. So for example, white-black is part of both Abzan and Mardu. So white-black overlaps on Endure and Mobilize. There are white cards and black cards with both Endure and Mobilize. Both Endure and Mobilize have the ability to create tokens. Therefore, the white-black theme is tokens. Similarly, blue and red overlap on Temur and Jeskai. So blue and red has access to Flurry and Harmonize, which together leads to like a spellcasting theme where Harmonize makes it easier to play more spells because you can cast your spells twice, and Flurry rewards you for casting more than one spell in a turn. Black-green, the overlap is Renew and Endure. Here, you can use Endure to make counters instead of making creatures, and then these overlap on as putting counters on things. So black-green can be built as a counters deck. Red and white's overlap is Mobilize plus Flurry. This is a loose one. Mobilize makes creatures when you attack. Flurry wants you to cast spells. Those don't clearly have anything to do with each other. However, the set design does give a pretty clear theme to red-white, which is a very familiar theme for red-white, which is like trumpet blasts, basically. You use Mobilize and also spells that make tokens to have a lot of creatures, and then you use spells to pump them up. The Flurry part of this is non-obvious, and sometimes it's not actually about multiple spells. But what red-white is doing is, like, pump my team. And I mean, there's also, just you can do generic Flurry stuff or whatever. And then blue-green, the overlap is Harmonize plus Renew. Both of those are things that can be done from the graveyard, and so the blue overlapping mechanic is things leave your graveyard. Also, if you care about things leaving your graveyard, you probably care about things entering your graveyard, but where the payoff is coming and the stuff this is built around and like the design of the gold cards is leave your graveyard is what matters to blue-green. On that note, every 2-color pair has a rare Siege and 2 gold uncommons in that pair, for the enemy colors only. The allied colors have no support. The set is really designed, the gold 2-color uncommons strongly point to the overlapping archetype that is implied by these mechanics, the way that I talked about. And the 2 uncommons will significantly pull in that direction. Like, in general, they're very strong cards if you're doing the thing that those 2 colors want to do, but not necessarily strong cards if you aren't working to support them. So if, for example, you are drafting a teamer deck, if your focus as a teamer deck isn't in graveyard stuff, if you're doing like, I have powerful creatures and I'm attacking, or you're doing like, I'm just like Flurry stuff, but like not with a ton of Harmonize, then the 2/2 that draws a card whenever you cast a card from your graveyard might not trigger very much. So there are ways to have access to the gold uncommons, but not be doing what they're trying to do, or to really build around them and do the thing that they're doing. And I think that the effect is that in a lot of ways, this set is kind of a secret 2-color set, where it will play similarly to Strixhaven, where you can play any 2-colored enemy pair, which is not to say that 3-color is not supported. 3-color is actually very well supported. The mana for playing 3-color felt very good, but you're usually going to end up with 2 base colors. Part of it is the amount of support for doing a thing that the 2 colors are doing kind of encourages you to choose an archetype that's based in a 2-color strategy and draft around that strategy. So you're drafting a 2-color deck. So that's part of it. Another part of it is early in the draft, you take a strong monocolor card. Your next pick, ideally, you take another card of the same color. If you can't take a card of the same color, you would strongly prefer to take a card of an enemy color rather than a card of an allied color, because that leaves you open to 2 wedges rather than locking you into a single wedge. And so the way to stay open is to settle into drafting 2 enemy colors, and then you can kind of draft the thing that those are doing, and then as you start to see good gold cards, you can let that choose like what your splash is to complete your 2-color deck being into a wedge where you get access to powerful wedge cards. But the powerful wedge cards are adding power to your deck more than they're adding direction to your deck in a lot of cases. And so what you're doing is you're drafting around the theme and strategy of the 2-color pair while including good gold cards from a 3rd color. But the support, in terms of the support for fixing, is so strong that if you're base 2 colors, it's very easy to end up actually splashing both complementing 3rd colors. So whatever 2 colors you are, say you're white-black, you wouldn't want to play any cards that are their shared ally. So you're not going to have any blue in your deck, but you'll have red and green because you'll have both Mardu and Abzan cards in your deck. But you won't touch blue at all. So you're drafting 4 colors, but you're only drafting 2 clans or wedges, and you're mostly drafting 2 colors with just like, you know, 2 colors and 2 splashes is going to give you probably better mana than solid 3-color. So a lot of the decks are going to end up doing that. And a big part of it is just a result of the fact that you gain information about what your deck is chronologically. Like, I think this is going to be more true in draft than in sealed. And it's just about how the draft encourages you to stay open and choose some synergy gradually over time and choose like which other cards you can play over time and find the fixing for that over time. And like the way that you get information about what your deck can do and wants to do leads to this incentive structure around having mostly a 2-color deck. Whereas in sealed, I think it's a little bit more likely that you'll just be like, okay, what's the best wedge here? All right, I'm playing that deck, and if your fixing is good enough, you'll be balanced 3 more often. It is also possible to play 5 colors. The fixing is very good, and if you prioritize it, you can play 5 colors. And then the weird thing is, in a lot of sets, there's not a big difference between 4-color and 5-color. Like, once you have enough support for 4 colors, like maybe you add the 5th color, maybe you don't, but it's like pretty similar. In this set, 4-color is usually basically 2-color, whereas 5-color is a whole different thing. Now you have access to like more than twice as many different gold cards, because instead of playing gold cards from 2 wedges, you're playing gold cards from 5 wedges. So the 1 extra color gives you like access to way, way, way more gold cards, but at a very big cost. Because if you're playing if you imagine that you're base 2, if you splash a card of one extra color, it's pretty easy. Like if you're blue-green, it's really easy to throw a red card in, really easy to throw a black card in. A white card, well, there are no white gold cards that you can add without also adding red or black. So now you need 2 different splash colors, and you can only use one of your base colors to cast it. And then if you want to add a Mardu card to your deck, you need all 3 of your non-base colors, and none of your base colors can help you cast it. So it's basically uncastable. That said, I said that you can play 5 colors, you just have to not draft it as base 2-color. It's probably going to be, something along the lines of 5-color green. Like, you need to be very, very serious about fixing. You need to just have a lot of like dual lands and probably a lot of tri lands and things that tap for 5 colors. And there are so many gold cards, and having access to all these gold cards is very powerful. And as I'll talk about in a little bit, the set overall is pretty slow. It gives you time to do this. Like, 5-color good stuff, I do think will be an archetype here. But there's a much bigger difference between 4-color and 5-color than between 3-color and 4-color. Moving on to another topic, I want to talk about drafting lands. For the most part, it's pretty standard drafting lands in a multicolored set stuff. I generally say that where I pick lands broadly is below things that appreciably change the power level of my deck and above things that are roughly at replacement level, which usually means they're like competing with premium commons, generally behind like the best removal spell in each color or whatever. Like, usually there are like 2 commons in each color that I'll usually take over good fixing, and I'll take good fixing over all the other commons. But I want to talk about the fact that like the dual lands are not created equal. The enemy color dual lands go in 2 different wedges, while the allied colors only go in 1 wedge. So more people are looking for the enemy colored lands. So it's harder to get the enemy color lands. Does that mean the enemy color lands are better? Hot take, no. The reason is, if you are drafting a base 2-color deck with a splash, you would rather have a dual land that includes your splash color and one of your base colors than a dual land that is both of your base colors, because you want to minimize the number of off-color basics that you have to play. So the more people want the enemy lands, but the allied lands are actually stronger for the people who can use them. And I think that this is something that a lot of people overlook. I don't think it impacts stuff that much, but I think that there will be times when you like see 2 lands in the same pack. I think that can happen. And if you know that you can use both of them and you know what your base colors are, you should take the one that's a splash rather than the one that's just base colors. More stuff on making mana work. I like the incidental fixing a lot, by which I mean the monuments and devotees. The monuments are 2-mana artifacts that search your library for a basic land of one of the 3 types related to its color combination, and then you can spend mana and sacrifice them to get some guys later on. And I think those cards are pretty good. Spending turn 2 or just spending 2 mana in general to find the land doesn't hurt you all that much. And you go up a card here, right? This isn't like spending 2 mana to land cycle. This is like playing a land cycler, except it's not like a mountain cycler. It's like a basic land cycler where it gets whatever color you want if you're just those 3 colors. But it's like if the cycling card had flashback, right? Like, you're not down a spell because you chose to get a land instead. You get the land and then you get the spell later. And the spells are pretty reasonable. They're not like aggressively costed, but they, give you something. They're only like a mana overcosted or something. So you end up paying a tiny bit too much to find a land and a tiny bit too much to cast a spell, but you get both of them in 1 card. And that can really help, just smooth out your mana. And then the devotees are similar. They're like slightly bad rate creatures, but not terrible, that let you fix your mana. And, over the years, I've been pretty fond of the like mana worker type guys, like the, 2/1s or 1/3 or whatever, 2-mana artifact creatures that let you like filter a mana. And the amount of fixing that those things provide while also letting you contribute to the board has been like very useful. And I think that the devotees generally give you a better body than that, and the fixing, does what you want it to do. So I think that in general, those should be, cards that you're expecting to play, but they're like filler power level. You don't need to take them highly, but they're nice. You should take them, and they make the mana work a lot better. Up next, the set is relatively slow. There are only 2 common creatures that cost 1 mana. They're both 1/2s. One of them is the Mardu Devotee. It scries 2 and lets you filter mana, and it's a 1/2 for 1. And the other is the blue 1/2 flash that shrinks something's power. So, you don't even want to play that one on turn 1. Neither of these are particularly aggressive, and they both kind of lead to, slower games more than they lead to faster games, because they have more toughness than power and, come down and kind of gum up the board. Also, there are no common creatures with 3 power that can attack. So, a lot of decks are going to need to spend the early turns making their mana work. Playing tap lands, playing the cards that search for basic lands, generally not contributing to the board. And the creatures were designed to let people do that and to not be very punishing out of the gates. That means that, the games where someone gets completely run over are less common. There are aggro decks, but those decks generally need a little bit of time to set up and then do something big and explosive rather than, curving out and getting damage in from the get-go. So that means the set's just it's slow because the cards to go fast aren't there in a traditional 2-color curve out aggro kind of sense. Also, there are a lot of powerful late game spells that are very castable. The stuff that costs 7 or 8 mana, you'll get there most of the time, especially if you build around trying to do that, and they do really strong things. So if you draft 6, 7, 8 mana cards that are really powerful, and you plan to build a deck that has inevitability because you have these really powerful bombs, you're going to play against other people who did the same thing, and having a couple powerful cards will not necessarily let you beat those people. You're going to have to play Battlecruiser Magic or Control Mirrors or whatever it ends up being. You're going to be, back and forth throwing really big spells at each other in some of your matchups. We just had a set where counter spells were not a big factor. Counter spells are back. There are, 2 common and an uncommon counter spell at good rates. There are higher rarity cards that can also counter things or bounce things from the stack and stuff. So your spells don't always resolve, and it's important that that's true, because there are some spells that do really, really powerful things. While we're coming from a, relatively slow set with Aether Drift into another relatively slow set, I would say that these sets are slow in pretty different ways, and I expect the gameplay to be very different. I have developed a bit of a reputation or brand around the cards that move cards from your graveyard to your library. So I suspect that some people are going to be asking my opinion on Jadecast Sentinel, which is the 4-mana 1/5 reach creature that can tap 2 mana and tap, put a card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. Because this creature has summoning sickness and it taps to use, so you can only do it once, it works very differently than something like Barkform Harvester, which you can use immediately and you can use multiple times. It is not safe to empty your library and then use Jadecast Sentinel to draw whatever you want, because a removal spell will ruin everything, and you can't draw it at the end, play it, and use it immediately. Or, if you play it anytime it's the late game where it's clear that that's what's going on, your opponent gets a chance to kill it before you can put anything back. So this is not really a deck yourself, get card selection kind of card. But it still does the thing that it does. It lets you reuse your good cards and like makes your library more powerful over time in a way that those don't because of the other cards in the set. Specifically, the fact that any omen, which is the spell ability on the dragon cards, shuffles that card into your deck. There are a lot of ways to repeatedly shuffle your deck. So if you activate Jadecast Sentinel a few times and put a few good spells from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck, then when you use an omen, you shuffle those into your deck. And so if you have especially really good instants and sorceries, Jadecast Sentinel can be a way to potentially use those multiple times over the course of a long game. Now, this is only relevant because this is a slower format and you can draft decks that are planning to play the kinds of games where this is long enough that this stuff might matter. And fortunately, Jadecast Sentinel's stats are very good for that kind of deck. A 1/5 reach lines up pretty well in the format. There are a lot of dragons, but most of them don't have 5 or more power, so it blocks most of the dragons. And there's a bit of a 4 power theme hanging out. It's very minor compared to like the previous Tarkir's 4 power theme, but there is at least one card that cares about stuff with 4 power, and there are a number of creatures that have 4 power, and there are some spells that deal 4 damage. So 5 is a good amount of toughness. It blocks well, it lives through some stuff. So I don't think Jadecast Sentinel's great, but it does, give access to some of the, deck healing, graveyard shuffling type strategies that I like, but in a way that is notably, I think, pretty different than something like a Barkform Harvester or a Hoverstone Pilgrim from Ixalan. So that's what I have to say about Jadecast Sentinel. I am sure that people are going to ask me many times how good the different wedges or color combinations or colors or strategies or whatever are. I don't have a ranking. My first impression is that all the different plans seemed well supported and strong versions of any of the decks can do really impressive things. I suspect that the, data aggregating sites will make it pretty clear what the relative aggregate strengths of the different themes are. I would be surprised if any of them are, it's never right to do this, but I don't have a strong opinion about, this one's best. This is a pre-release, I believe, where you get to choose your shard. I'm not going to give you any advice on choose this one. I think you should choose the one that's fun for you. Let's be real, it's a pre-release. But, I imagine you can find other creators who, looked at the power level of the higher rarity cards more and came up with an opinion about what you should play. I wouldn't take any of it very seriously. And again, I would recommend just choosing the thing that sounds fun to you. But I don't know, that's what I have to say about that. And that's the stuff that occurred to me to spell out about the set for kind of getting a broad understanding of what's going on and where we're at. But I now going to turn it over to Twitch chat for questions. While I'm letting people think of and ask that stuff, I want to thank the newest patron at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. Emily, thank you very much for the support. I really appreciate it. If anyone else is interested in getting in here and supporting the podcast, again, check out patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. Is the set slow enough for aggro to be real 3-color, or are they all 2-color with a splash? That's a good question. I suspect that you can be aggressive solid 3, especially if, you're like Mardu and you play like 3 of the Mardu devotees, like that's kind of a lot of those, but they are, 1-drops where you don't have access to very many other 1-drops, and they scry, so they like theoretically help you not draw more of them. And like it doesn't necessarily sound clearly bad to me to have a bunch of those. And then I think that like the Mardu monolith or whatever, I'm forgetting the name of the 2-mana artifact cycle, but I think the like effect of the Mardu one, which makes like 3/1/1 haste menace guys, is really good in the aggressive Mardu decks. So I do think that you can play enough fixing to pretty reliably be able to cast like your creatures that cost like ABC mana cost or whatever on 3. And so I think that it is possible to draft solid 3 in general and solid 3 aggro. But I think that you have to like pay attention to the fact that you're doing that and like draft to make the mana work. So it sounds like the default draft will start in one color and then jump from there to an enemy color and continue jumping to new enemy colors, with the first 4 colors taking slightly more activating energy for each jump, but with a much higher activation energy for the 5th color. That's a reasonable way to think about it. And, like the thing that's interesting here is that 3 of the 5 wedges would put you into the 5th color. And so, like, not being able to go to that color does cut off a lot of the gold cards. Also, there are, like, a lot of drafts will start that way, but I don't want to ignore the script for a draft that just starts with 3-color gold card. Because obviously there are a lot of strong 3-color gold cards, and it's not that rare that someone is going to just start a draft by taking a 3-color rare. In that situation, the like drafting experience and sequence goes pretty differently, where you know what your 3rd color is right away, or at least you know what 3 colors you are. But you don't exactly know what your 3rd color is, because you don't know which of these 3 colors are your first 2 if you have those. I think it's a lot more likely that you'll end up solid 3 if you start with a gold card than if you start with a monocolor card. So I think that like the Jeskai decks that started with a 3-color Jeskai card are going to end up looking on average pretty differently than the Jeskai decks that started with a 1-color card, unless they, moved into Jeskai on pick 2 or whatever, which will happen a decent portion of the time. But like there are a couple of different ways to go about it, and I think that that kind of gets like built into the DNA of a deck, where you could often like reverse engineer like how did this person end up there. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was like if I looked at 10 decks and tried to sort like was the first pick here a gold card or was the first pick here a monocolor card, if I could sort with reasonable accuracy. I'm not sure about that, I haven't tried doing it, but it might end up going that way. I think that when you start with a 3-color card, you will often want to figure out which 2 colors are your base colors, but not always. So sometimes you'll just, okay, well, I have this 3-color card. I know I'm 3 colors for sure. I'm going to prioritize fixing. You get some early fixing, and now you're like, all right, whatever. I'm just these 3 colors. I'm not going to worry about what my base colors are. I'm just these 3. Can you talk more about 5-color draft strategy? Specifically, how do you balance mana fixing, bombs, and interaction? Can you give a few examples of which first few picks would convince you to go deep in 5-color rate? Sure. The thing that would make me want to go deep in a 5-color deck is if I started with 2 like good rare or bomb mythics that were like between the 2 of them, all 5 colors, and especially if both of them cost 4 or more mana, so I have a little bit of wiggle room on time to like set up my mana. In general, I think because it's so much harder to play the fifth color, like double bomb is the likely way to end up there. I think if the cards are a little bit weaker, you more likely just choose one of them that you're supporting. And if they are cheaper cards, then it's more likely that you have to choose one of them because, it's not worth, like, you can't get mana that lets you cast both of them on 3, and casting your 3-drop on turn 6 isn't worth working for. But, if you have, like, some of the super powerful, like, 7 and 8 mana cards, where it's like, all right, I'm going to need all these colors eventually, but I have a lot of time to do it. I'll make this work. Then I think it's like pretty doable. And the manolith in this set, the dragon something orb or whatever that taps for a mana of any color, and when you play a dragon, it enters with a +1/+1 counter. Totally reasonable manolith variant. It's not hard to have like 5-ish dragons in your deck. So you're going to get some +1/+1 counters out of it, in addition to getting those big dragons down faster and like making your like weird gold cards easy to cast. I think that you're going to want to really highly prioritize 3-color lands, especially 3-color lands that don't have a lot of overlap with the 3-color lands you already have. And I think that you're going to want to play the devotees. They're like, if you're trying to play a lot of colors, you would rather have, there's not going to be a different like 1 or 2 mana creature that's going to give you more value than the value that the fixing from the devotees gives you. You'd want to play non-overlapping, like you'd want to play like one of each devotee instead of like a lot of one devotees or whatever. Similarly, the monuments or whatever they're called, the artifacts that search for a land, wouldn't hurt to have a random mix of those in there. Again, I'd prefer to choose some base colors, but depending on how your mana works, you might not really do that. Like if you just have like a lot of dual lands and a lot of devotees and stuff, you might be just like pretty balanced. And it's really about, just like playing that. Like there's a lot of like the number of cards of commons in this set that can contribute toward having better mana is like at least double the number of cards in Aether Drift. And they don't go very high. So if you just make a point of having all of your like filler cards be filler cards that fix your mana, then all of your other cards can just be random 3-color bombs. So that's kind of where my head would be at drafting 5-color. Any thoughts in ranking the fixing? I've talked about this some already, but the things here being Trilands, Duels, Evolving Wilds, Monuments, Devotee, and the other artifacts. There's also like the green Harmonized Land Search spell. Trilands best. Duels and Evolving Wilds are weird to compare. Some are going to want one, some are going to want the other. In general, early on, Evolving Wilds over Duels due to versatility and being able to get any of 3 colors in a 3-color deck. I think the lands in general over the Monuments and Devotees. I imagine that whether you prefer a Monument or a Devotee is going to vary from deck to deck. I think that in general, the other stuff, like the 3-color Mana Rock, is worse than the Monuments and Devotees in like a normal curve 3-color deck, but it switches to being probably appreciably better in an appropriate curve 5-color deck. If you start with a gold card, you'll know one of your 2 base colors. Theoretically, yes. Yeah, and I do think that that's actually another common way for the draft to go, is you draft a 5-color card, you draft a 3-color card, say like a Sultai card, and then you just like try to focus on green specifically. I've certainly done some of that, and I've certainly like done all right, so I'm Sultai, so I'll choose green cards, and then I feel like I've waited too long to figure out, am I blue-green or am I green-black? And because I haven't figured out whether I'm blue-green or green-black, I haven't figured out whether I'm like a counters deck or a leave the graveyard deck. And my deck ends up like less focused because I'm like one color and three color rather than two color. So I do think that it's like good and coherent to start by focusing on like the one mutual enemy color in the three color group. But I think that it's generally pretty helpful to try to figure out a secondary color earlier rather than later. But again, this is all going to vary from draft to draft. You had said the common coercion effect felt strong yesterday. Are you still viewing it highly after a day of playing? So this is the 3 mana, look at your opponent's hand, exile a card, put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures cards. It impressed me. Getting one of my cards exiled felt devastating. The knowledge my opponents gained was very big. It was very useful in disrupting whatever I was trying to do. The counter, matters a lot to some decks. It felt like a powerful card. As far as like picking it highly, it didn't feel like you need to do that. The card was going pretty late, and I don't think you want a ton of them. Like I played 3 of them once, but it's like pretty hard to do that. You need to have like a lot of 2-drops, like not very many other 3-drops, and like it doesn't affect the battlefield. Like it's good, but I don't think you want a ton of them. And I think that you can generally get them late. That'll, once we all see how all the commons perform, will, if it ends up being a really high performing card, maybe it'll start getting taken more highly, and then you also have to take it more highly. Or, maybe like it's too bad when 2 aggressive decks are playing each other, or maybe, it's too bad when you draw it late, and I just like lost because people drew it at the right time. And maybe we'll learn like that it's better not to play it. But I would say that, it felt closer to Humiliate than Coercion. And Humiliate was a card that performed incredibly well. That's the Strixhaven white-black for basically the same effect, but doesn't exile. How did you feel about the monobrid cards? Any of them felt good to play even at 4 mana, 5 mana? So this is the common cycle of cards that cost hybrid, where it's either like green or 2 colorless, blue or 2 colorless, for each of the colors in its wedge. In general, I think that something weird would have to happen for you to want to play one where it will cost at least 4 mana. I like the way that the mechanic works, where you put them in a deck where you're trying to cast them at 3, but if your color skewed, you can still cast them at 4. I don't think any of them are generally going to be something that you want at 4 mana, but if they're all like, if you have to pay 4, it's probably fine, especially if you did something else on 3. I don't have super strong feelings about like ranking them against each other or anything. They all felt like pretty reasonable in the deck that wants the effect that they give. Have I talked about how good removal is given value creatures? No. I feel like that's just part of Magic these days. Like every set has a lot of creatures that like give you some kind of immediate effect or do something when they die or whatever. Like many creatures in most sets are like value creatures, and removal's still, an important thing to have. I feel like there's nothing exceptional about this set that I want to add to that. I guess I would say, there's also value removal in this set, right? Like it's the common cycle of like reveal a dragon removal. Like the green one lets you surveil, and the white one gains some life. Obviously, that's not a ton of value, but also removal is usually going to be trading up on mana. Where did you find the critical points for sticking to a color pair, or when to stop taking early fixing? Some have discussed going close to 2-color or monocolor as close as one can early on, though I know that the fixing allows one to take all fixing early and then do their archetype in packs 2 to 3. I don't really like the idea of like just taking, like, I don't want to approach this like cube or whatever where I just like spend my first 5 picks taking lands or something. I think that you should, you know, start with the payoff. Like, only do the, like, I'm trying to do 5 color, I'm taking all the fixing for it. If you already have, cards that need you to do that to let you play them and the cards are strong enough. It's not like there are a bunch of cards that like are super super good such that you'll definitely see one of them later on if your mana supports that. And as far as like stop taking early fixing, that's not really how I think about anything. So I don't really know how to address it. Like, you should take fixing as you know that you need it, and you should take it over stuff that doesn't matter. But you should take stuff that does matter more than you take fixing unless you're desperate for the fixing. I think trying to be monocolor has not worked well for me. I feel like it's better to establish yourself in a 2-color base because of the direction and synergies provided by the 2-color base that the monocolor doesn't really have. Yeah, my real answer to this, or I think the most relevant point of this to comment on in my mind, is that it is good to be like to have like I think the synergy and strategy in the 2-color pairs is relevant and easy to overlook. Thoughts on the 2-color Omen Dragons? Any that are especially playable for just one side or especially unplayable unless you're casting both, or is that just not an issue? So there's a cycle of uncommon dragons that have an omen of a color that's different than the dragon. Offhand, I can immediately think of what the red-blue one and the green-black one do. And I think that I suspect that with all of them, they're pretty bad if you don't have access to both. Oh, okay, so the green-black one is a sorcery that kills a creature with power 3 or less for the Omen, and a 3/3 flyer that destroys an artifact or enchantment for 5 for the dragon. I think this card's pretty good, but I don't think I would like it if I could only use one side of it. Sorcery speed, kill something small only, sounds like a little underpowered, and there aren't enough artifacts and enchantments that I'm excited about killing that I would want to play a 5-mana 3/3 to do it. Positioning of artifact and enchantment removal in this set is interesting. The sieges in particular, like, it is a cycle of rares that take over the game if you can't answer them. And there are like pretty easy to play effects that destroy like enchantments to like make that not as much of a problem as it might have been in the previous Tarkir. But there aren't that many other things that you're excited about killing. There's like the common Oblivion Ring and like a few other things, but it's felt like I wanted to be able to play the like naturalize that can also exile up to one card in a graveyard and draw a card, because it's like a cycling naturalize, but also the like disrupt the graveyard thing has some play to it and stuff. But it mostly didn't feel good. Like it's just a little clunky and narrow, and you kind of want to focus on the thing your deck is doing. So it didn't feel like a great main deck card, which makes me think that this dragon wouldn't be great either. The black one, I like this one more than the green one. The spell is an instant that gives +2/+2 lifelink and hexproof. I think that's a really good combat trick. I could see maybe playing that by itself, but probably not. But like, it's the kind of thing where it's like, wouldn't I just have a way to cast the dragon in my deck at that point? Like, it's not that hard to find a black mana somewhere. But I do think that like that is a pretty good combat trick. And then it's a 5-mana 4/4 flyer, which is a pretty good start, with ward, pay 2 life, and when it enters, remove all counters from up to one target creature, which is some added bonus, but like 5-mana 4/4 flyer ward 2 is like pretty good single pip. Like, I think that card, I'm not excited about it by itself, but like if you have enough omen stuff that it being a dragon matters, like I could see playing either half of this, but again, it just seems so likely to me that I literally wouldn't be able to cast the other side of it if this card's in my deck. It's like a little bit weird for me to think about that way. I think it's kind of my answer on this stuff in general. Is like, when you say no way to use it, do you really mean that? And like, why didn't we fix that problem? I tried playing with the red one with a blue ability, Runescale Stormbrood, which is the blue ability is counter a spell with mana value 2 or less for 1 and a blue, and the dragon is a 4 mana 2/2 flyer that gets +2/+0 when you play a non-creature or dragon spell. I didn't love either half of this. I think the counter spell is like quite narrow in this set. Like, there are not very many cards that really matter that cost 2 or less. And then like the body is fine. Sometimes it can, attack for a lot. I think you really need to like build around, I plan to attack for 6 or 8 damage with this thing to really want it. The white one, the red spell is very good. 2 mana sorcery, deal 5 damage to a creature without flying. This is just roast. That's like a high pick uncommon in another set. And then you can also play it as a 6 mana 5/4 that gains 5 life. I would play the red side of this if I can't use the white side. I wouldn't play the white side if I can't use the red side. And the blue one with a green ability, the green spell is pretty bad. It's 3 mana, put 3+1/+1 counters on a creature you control. There will be times where like you want to do this, but it's like that's not a card that you want to put in a draft deck for the most part. And then the dragon is a 4/3 flash flyer that lets you play dragons and sorceries as though they had flash, which is like pretty nice. I think this is maybe the weakest of them. I think the black and white ones are appreciably stronger, followed by the green one, followed by the red one, followed by the blue one. But yeah, I think the corner case where you literally can't play the secondary color on this is pretty rare, and in general, these cards are like pretty good, again, with, some differences that I've already discussed. All right. It looks like that's going to cover it for now. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Looking forward to the set coming out next week and getting to play some more and try to figure out some of this stuff. Playing all in one day doesn't give you a ton of time to like synthesize what you've learned and act on it. So getting to play a bunch and then pause and reflect and put this together, I feel like I'll be in a better place to approach it and figure out how I want to draft the set and what kind of stuff I like next week. So I haven't decided for sure if I'm going to record the podcast on Wednesday or Thursday next week. I think it's going to depend on how comfortable I'm feeling about the set after Tuesday. So stay tuned for updates on that, I suppose. And have a good week and enjoy the pre-release if you're playing it. And bye for now.
Prepare for light speed.